Tatiana, at the age of 42, seemed to have it all. She had her own restaurant money and the necessary connections. Could she, a simple girl from the village, dream of this more than 20 years ago? No, of course not. Deep down, she might have nurtured thoughts that one day she would become wealthy. But back then, everything was different. Her mother passed away the year Tatiana finished school. She didn't know her father, and there were no grandparents. A neighbor took her in for 3 months until Tatiana passed her exams. Then she became a free bird, facing what seemed like boundless opportunities. The only problem was the lack of money. Selling the gold inherited from her mother, Tatiana moved to the city to attend an educational institution. She realized that even if she got into university, she probably wouldn't afford to study there. So she considered a simple culinary school. If they were dealing with food there, maybe she would get something to eat. Plus, there was accommodation in the school's dormitory. She enrolled without any issues, and they provided her with a place to stay. However, the situation with food turned out to be different from what Tatiana had expected. There was no practical training in the first year, only theory at the school itself. Fortunately, she received a scholarship. Tatiana shared the dormitory with nice girls who never complained about her consuming their food. Later on, she managed to combine studies with a job as an assistant cook in a cafe. The financial situation improved. In her second year, she encountered what seemed like true love. She fell head over heels, but the prince on a white horse left her. It became the most challenging trial in her life. A mystery unfolded in her fate, which she kept secret. She later tried to forget everything like a bad dream, and over time, she almost succeeded. For many years, her heart turned to stone. Tatiana loved no one else. She worked as a cook in a cafeteria, then in a cafe, and eventually secured a position in a restaurant. There were admirers in her life, but she couldn't find true love. 10 years ago, when she was already working in the restaurant, the owner noticed her. Maikai was over 50, and his family perished in an accident. He liked the young woman with sad eyes. He courted her for a long time, and Tatiana initially rejected his advances until she melted. For the first time in many years, she allowed her heart to believe in a miracle. More precisely, she allowed herself to be loved. Maikai proposed to her, and they were happy for many years. However, it wasn't as smooth as it seemed. Tatiana never revealed her terrible secret to her husband. He passed away in her arms from a heart attack. She regretted his death deeply. The only person who loved her left this world. Regardless, Tatiana, with gritted teeth and her slightly thawed heart, took over her husband's business. For the past 2 years, Tatiana has been the rightful owner of the restaurant. On that day, she stayed at work a bit longer and entered the restaurant closer to lunchtime. Unfortunately, her car wouldn't start in the morning, so she had to take a taxi. The taxi got stuck in traffic, then got into a minor accident. So much time was wasted in vain. Tatiana was clearly in a bad mood when she opened the doors of her restaurant. The doorman, Peter, was yelling at some girl in the vestibule. "Why did you come here? I told you we have no vacancies," he said with displeasure. Peter had his back turned to the door, so he didn't notice Tatiana. She raised an eyebrow. Well, it turns out the doorman decided to play boss. There really were no vacancies, but that didn't apply to Peter in any case. Enjoying his authority, he menacingly leaned over the girl, grabbing her shoulder and intending to push her away. He turned around and saw Tatiana. He paled, greeted her. "Here, Tatiana, this girl came from the street and asked about a job," he explained in a justified tone. Tatiana nodded silently and carefully examined the girl. Petite, slender, pale as if shining through. "Is she not eating enough?" flashed through Tatiana's mind, and for some reason, the restaurant owner felt sorry for this girl, reminiscent of her younger self. "How old are you?" Tatiana asked. "Almost 22, the stranger replied quietly. Then nervously she added, "I wash dishes very well, I know how. Take me part-time, I can work evenings. I really need it." Everyone needs something. Tatiana smirked and pondered. Something prevented her from saying no to this girl. "So, you can work evenings. What about at night, after the restaurant closes?" "I can." The girl hesitated a bit and replied, "I can hire you as a part-time cleaner to clean the hall and part of the kitchen after closing. It's about 2 to 3 hours of work. Are you okay with that? Tatiana asked. I agree, the girl exclaimed joyfully, especially since I live nearby. Dear viewers, I appreciate your support. I will be grateful for subscribing to my channel as it motivates me to release new videos every day. That's wonderful, Tatiana smiled. What's your name? And do you have a sanitary book? I have a sanitary book, the girl nodded. I used to work as a waitress in a cafe, but I had to leave, and they call me Masha. All right, Masha, we'll figure out why you left that cafe. I'll observe you at work. Come tomorrow morning with the documents for the contract, Tatiana said and went to her office under the surprised gaze of her assistant. For the first time, they hired someone so quickly and easily into such a decent establishment. Meanwhile, Masha stood there and smiled, watching Tatiana leave. Was she the owner? She asked Peter, coming to her senses. Yes, she was, grumbled disappointed Peter. He was upset that his authority had diminished in the eyes of this girl. Go now, they're waiting for you tomorrow. Masha nodded in agreement, said goodbye, and left the restaurant. 2 days later, Masha started working. She was efficient, meticulous, hardworking, easily befriended the whole team. Even Peter, who was bursting with self-importance, interacted with her quite warmly, like an old friend. Tatiana became more convinced that she had made the right spontaneous decision to hire this girl. And yes, she still reminded her of herself in her youth, just as modest, shy, even smiled like Tatiana. The owner's heart involuntarily tightened when she looked at the new employee. Tatiana decided to observe the girl a little more and then offer her a waiter job. She felt that Masha would handle it. That evening, Tatiana stayed late at work. She checked the bills, reviewed offers from food suppliers. Then she had to work on the fire safety journal because an inspection was due soon. Studying the evacuation plan, Tatiana remembered that in the last inspection, they fined her for blocking the service entrance with boxes. They just didn't have time to remove some of the boxes under the products when the firefighters arrived. To save time, she decided not to go down to the first floor, but to just check the cameras, one of which happened to be positioned in front of the restaurant's service entrance. Tatiana opened the surveillance program and chuckled in satisfaction. Everything was in order. This time, there would be no questions for her. And then she saw Masha entering the restaurant. Seemingly nothing strange, as it was closing time, and she usually came around this time. But Masha had a large bag in her hands. Was she stealing? Indeed, she worked in the kitchen, where there were refrigerators, one of which was out of the camera's sight. This thought scorched Tatiana. She felt so offended. She took in the girl from the street, gave her a job, and she was stealing? She had warmed the snake on her chest. Tatiana wanted to go down to the hall immediately and confront the dishonest cleaner, but at the last moment, she held back. She decided to wait until Masha finished everything and then catch her at the exit. Tatiana was shaking with anger, imagining that she would have to expose the vile thief. After waiting for some time, the owner went downstairs and stood by the door. Only the security guard and Masha remained in the restaurant. They exchanged a few words. Masha said goodbye and headed towards the exit, and then she saw Tatiana. "Oh, hello," Masha whispered, paling, her hand gripping the handle of her bag so tightly that the joints of her fingers turned white. The girl hesitantly took a step toward the door. "Hold on there," commanded Tatiana. "Show me what you stole." "Stole?" gasped Masha, shaking her head. "You're mistaken. Who do you take me for?" Tatiana paled at such shameless lying. "I can see that the bag is full." "Shameless. I picked her up from the street without even asking for a resume, and she's stealing from the kitchen. Show it, or I'll call the police." "No need for the police," Masha whispered almost inaudibly. Lowering her head and barely holding back tears, she gently placed the bag on the floor and unzipped it. Tatiana looked and recoiled. What she saw shocked her. The security guard, who was also standing nearby, froze in surprise. "A child?" Tatiana whispered softly. "Where did she come from? Whose is she?" "She's my daughter," Masha admitted. Indeed, in the bag slept a tiny girl, about 5 months old. The baby sweetly smacked her lips in her sleep and smiled. "But how? Why? What for?" Tatiana bombarded Masha with questions, then regained her composure, lifted the bag carefully. "It's cold on the stone floor for her. There's a warm blanket in there, Masha sniffled, wiping her tears. Enough standing around. Come to my office, commanded Tatiana. In the office, placing the bag on the couch, the two women sat across from each other in armchairs, and Masha told her sad story. She grew up in an orphanage, never knew her parents. In her childhood, she dreamt of having a family, but no one ever adopted her. After the orphanage, Masha was determined to create her own family, and her children would be the happiest. She was in her second year at the communication college when she met Andrei. Cheerful, generous, wealthy, he charmed the girl. Masha already imagined herself in a wedding dress, and then she saw Andrei with someone else. They were in a car, kissing. Masha decided to confront Andrei about what a scoundrel he was, but he just laughed. "Get out of here, beggar," he said. "When I need affection, I'll come, and now don't interfere with me talking to my bride." His friend also looked mockingly at Masha, not bothered by the fact that Andrei was cheating on her. How could she be jealous of some simpleton, especially a girl from an orphanage? Andrei just missed her when she went to England for almost a year. But now she was back, and they would never part. This was more or less what the girl said to Tatiana, and Andrei just nodded in confirmation of her words. Masha listened, wanting to run away, disappear, hide. No, this couldn't be happening to her. Andrei couldn't treat her like this, especially now. After all, Masha was 2 months pregnant. Forgetting all pride, she told Andrei right there by the car. "So, have an abortion," he casually replied. "Now you can do it all with insurance for free." Saying this, he started the car and sped away with his lover, and Masha just stood there by the road. Dark, heavy thoughts filled her mind, but the girl, gathering all her willpower, told herself, "I'll manage." And she did. Masha never thought about an abortion. She wanted this child. After all, it was her own daughter. True, she had to quit college. She had no time for studies. As an orphan, she didn't receive any more social scholarships. To make a living, she got a job as a waitress in a cafe. She worked there until her stomach appeared. Then the owner fired her. He had no desire to pay maternity leave. Fortunately, she had her own corner. The state allocated her a room in the dormitory. With the neighbors, things weren't lucky though. On one side lived a hysterical woman with 2 kids on the other side, a former convict with a drinking problem. There was a good woman on the floor, Grandma Valentina. The old lady had lived in the dormitory her whole life, ever since she got this corner from the factory in her youth. She never had a family of her own. Masha immediately liked her, and Valentina not only fed the girl, but also comforted her with conversations. Then Lena was born. That's what Masha named her daughter. Grandma Valentina helped the young mother with the baby. Although she never had children herself, her feminine intuition guided her on what to do. Everything was fine, except that the money for Lena, which they received, disappeared at an incredible speed. Clothes, medicine, food. Masha understood that she couldn't make ends meet for her daughter, and borrowing money from Grandma Valentina every time was against her conscience, even though the old lady never refused and often gave money herself, even though her pension was meager. And so Masha decided to take on an extra job. She discussed this matter in advance with Grandma Valentina. At first, the old lady was against it, but then she agreed. Masha was proud, let her do as she decided. Grandma Valentina agreed to look after the little one in the absence of her mother. Everything seemed to be going as Masha planned, but then the unexpected happened. Grandma Valentina died in her sleep. Saying goodbye to her beloved old lady, Masha was desperate, but decided that life goes on, and she must continue living for her beloved daughter. So she came up with a plan to take her daughter to work. She was still little, slept a lot, a calm girl. No one should suspect anything. After all, Masha came when the restaurant was already empty, and the security guard was always at the central exit, but she didn't account for the cameras, and that's how she got caught. "Will you fire me now?" Masha asked Tatiana, revealing everything. The restaurant owner was silent. She was still impressed by what she had heard, and she looked at this little cleaner with respect. She didn't abandon, didn't betray. Masha was incredibly strong, but how could she continue working? Tatiana couldn't allow a baby to sleep in the restaurant's utility room in a bag. That was beyond reasonable. "You say your neighbors are rowdy, noisy?" Tatiana unexpectedly asked Masha. almost every night from one side or the other, Masha sighed. Thank goodness, my daughter sleeps soundly, but I can't leave her alone there. I understand. Masha, how would you feel if I offered you to live with me? Tatiana finally asked. No, this was not a spontaneous decision, but a well-thought-out idea. Tatiana liked Masha, and this little angel in the bag so sweetly snored. Masha hesitated at such an offer, then began to refuse, but Tatiana, showing determination, managed to persuade the young mother not to resist but to agree. You understand, I live alone. Sometimes I get very bored in the evenings, Tatiana confessed, and here you will be. You can manage the housework. Cook, clean. As it turns out, I will pay you more than as a cleaner. Masha hesitated a bit more but soon agreed. The next day, Masha and her daughter moved in with Tatiana. On this occasion, Tatiana put aside all restaurant affairs and helped the young mother settle into her new place. Tatiana showed Masha her room, then helped her unpack her things. And then, while sorting through a bag of baby clothes, Tatiana came across a handkerchief. Seeing it, the woman's hands trembled. It was a simple handkerchief with cherries embroidered on it. These cherries, Tatiana always remembered them, all because she embroidered them many years ago and she was still a culinary school student. Where did you get this? She whispered. Masha looked at Tatiana in surprise at the handkerchief. It's the only thing I have from my mom, she said with a trembling voice. They told me at the orphanage that they brought it with me from the maternity ward. Supposedly a nurse put a jumpsuit in my pocket. My mother left it for me. She left it in the maternity hospital with me, and I kept it. Tatiana's heart pounded fiercely. Her most secret, which she had kept for so many years, suddenly collapsed on her. The woman sat on the edge of the bed and burst into tears, and Masha stood next to her, not understanding anything. But in Tatiana's memory, events of distant years flashed. Here she confesses to her beloved that she will have a child, and he sends her away. It was terrifying to go to the hospital. Tatiana bore it all alone, and then it was too late. She had to give birth, but where would she go with the baby? No relatives, no support. In the dormitory, the warden, noticing her with a belly, said that he wouldn't let her go back with the child. And so, in the maternity hospital, Tatiana faced a difficult choice: to end up on the street with a baby without means of subsistence, or, by giving up her daughter, to get a diploma and start working. Tatiana chose the second option, and the daughter. She thought that later, when she grew stronger and stood on her own feet, she would take her back. But later, it was too late. No one wanted to talk to a mother who had abandoned her child. For many years, Tatiana searched for her little girl, but it was like beating against a stone wall. She couldn't achieve anything. And then Tatiana's heart froze. She swore that she would never love anyone again, so she lived like the Snow Queen, and she never confessed anything to her husband. But now, she held the handkerchief in her hands, the one that she tearfully placed in her baby's crib as a farewell. So is Masha her daughter? Tatiana looked at the girl through tears, and she had no strength or courage to confess it to her. And the tears kept flowing, but Masha understood everything herself. She paled, walked to her little one, and picked her up. We will leave, forgive us, she said dryly. Don't go, my daughter. Tatiana shouted through tears. Both women looked at each other, and no words could be said anymore. Mother and daughter finally met. One couldn't forgive, the other didn't hope to beg for forgiveness. Listen to me, Tatiana eventually asked Masha, and she, hesitating a little, stayed. She put her daughter in the crib, sat down next to Tatiana. Tatiana told everything how it was. Her sincerity, her tears melted Masha's heart. The girl always dreamed of meeting her biological mother, but she couldn't even imagine that this meeting would be like this. She felt sorry for Tatiana. Essentially, she found herself in a similar situation, only it was 100 times worse for Tatiana. She had no home, no kind people who would deter her from a desperate step. No, Masha didn't consider herself stronger or nobler. She was just a little luckier than Tatiana, and her little daughter was with her. Will you forgive me someday? Tatiana asked, wiping away tears. I forgave you a long time ago, Masha replied and looked at the woman. Her eyes moistened, and she added almost inaudibly, Mom. The women rushed into each other's arms. Then there were many more days and evenings of conversations, memories, and it was only pleasant communication. Tatiana was happy. Finally, the burden fell off her soul, and now she was a mother and a grandmother, and Masha was happy. Now she and her daughter were not alone in the whole world. And to judge, everyone can judge. Thanks for listening to this story. Be active and subscribe to the channel.